Hi, everybody. Today is September 13, 2023, and I'm honored to have Chris DeArmitt with us. He's got a bunch of letters. You don't have to pronounce those out, but it would be Chris DeArmitt. Uh, anyway, Chris, tell us about yourself, what your journey has been, and what interests you these days.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the show, Randall. I really appreciate it. So my name's Dr. Chris DeArmitt. I'm a professional scientist. I have been for decades. And basically, I'm a plastic scientist. I don't sell or make plastics. I don't distribute them. So I have no commercial interest in selling plastics, but I make plastics better. I make them last longer. I make them do new things, like be attracted to a magnet. Companies like Apple and Procter & Gamble come to me when they have problems that even they can't solve, and I help them to fix the problem. So that's what I do for a living. And how I got into this was my two daughters came home from school one day. I pay a lot of property tax to be in a nice school district. And they came home and they'd been taught things which were clear lies by their teachers. And that made me angry because I thought, well, I'm paying all this money and now my kids are being taught nonsense. And so then I thought, well, first I was angry. And then I thought, well, the teachers don't know any better, right? They're just reading the same nonsense on social media that everyone else does, because who has time to check the science? And that made me realize, well, nobody is checking the science. Now we just believe what we see online, on LinkedIn or on Facebook or whatever. The media doesn't check what they publish anymore. So I took it upon myself in my spare time as a hobby, unpaid, to read about 3,000 or 4,000 scientific articles. And as you know, as a scientist, they're incredibly dry and boring. They're no fun to read. And I had to read about things I've got no interest in, right? So I'm an expert already in polymer degradation. I was on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley talking about how plastic had failed in the body. So I'm not pro-plastic. I'm pro-truth and pro-evidence. And so I did all this searching. I already knew about degradation, but then people asked me, well, what about litter? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't looked at the science on litter. What about materials use? What about microplastics? What about forever chemicals? All of these things. So that's how I ended up reading, went down the rabbit hole and read about 3,000 or 4,000 scientific articles. Wow. And then I wrote a book for the Plastics Paradox. And before anyone thinks I'm here selling my book, it's for free in 5 different languages. You can download it. You don't need to enter your name or your details or anything. It's just a free download, because I think we should be making sensible decisions based on things that are actually true.
Well, that's amazing. So just to clarify, is this you here? Plastic Man?
Yeah, that's me.
Is that your superhero persona?
Yeah, I better get that outfit. Yeah, that looks tremendous.
Yeah.
Let me go and change. I'll be right back.
I've actually read Plastic Man. I'm Facebook friends with some comic book artists, and they found the art of Plastic Man to be really excellent. I forgot the guy who did it. So I went out and purchased a book on Plastic Man. And my younger son, he's a man. He's 27 now. He's a cartoonist, and I think he enjoyed it, but we all did. So anyway, I recommend it's a good read.
My company is called Phantom Plastics, and you can learn all the stuff free there with citations to the literature. And there's a pop band with a very strange symbol, just like the one you showed me, which is called Phantom Plastics. And I don't know what possessed them to call their pop band that, and I've never listened to their
why
music.
not? I think the answer is why not.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
The answer to many questions. So given your extensive research into plastics and the environment, what's the most surprising fact you've uncovered that contradicts popular belief or beliefs?
Probably the single most surprising was found after I'd finished the book. And that's why I recommend people look at, something I did after the book. And it is that plastics are 0.4% by weight of all materials we use, and under 1% by volume. And so that's all you need to know. You don't need to know anything more about plastics. We could end the conversation here, right? Because you'd have to be medically insane to think that we can solve a problem by obsessing over 0.5% of it, while steadfastly ignoring 99.5% of our problem. And that's exactly what we're doing now. Everyone's obsessing over plastics, vilifying, demonizing plastics, and completely ignoring 99% of our problem, which actually ensures that we will never make any real progress.
So when you say that 99.5% of our problem, or 6% of our problem, would be what? I mean, we're talking about waste materials?
Yeah, so if we look at materials use, for example, and waste, but if we look at materials use, about 84% is ceramics, about 9% is wood, about 6% is metal, and under 1% is actually on that page that you and I just discussed, that one summary page. There's a pie chart. And so, and plastics is 0.4% by weight. And anyone could check that in 2 minutes. You could literally ask Siri, hey, Siri, what's the global consumption of plastics? What's the global consumption of materials? And anyone could check that. Greenpeace could have checked it. World Wildlife Fund could have checked it. UNEP could have checked it. And yet nobody has. And so that basically encapsulates everything. There is just no way to solve a problem. I'm a problem solver by, that's my profession. And there's no way to solve it by, I mean, you're a medical man. What if somebody came to you with a heart attack and you said, well, let me comb your hair and I'll send you home. You should be right as rain, right? Let's make you look better, right? And that's exactly what we're doing now. We're obsessing over appearances and trivialities and completely ignoring. And that's why I call my talk The Great Plastics Distraction. It's not that plastics don't have impact. They definitely do. But if you look at a pie chart of what materials we're using, we find out that book estimates 1%. And when you actually check the numbers, it's even lower than that. I have some references. I always cite my data so you can go and check it yourself.
Yeah.
And if you look at waste, it's about the same. Plastics are also under 1% of all the waste we create.
So here's ceramics over here.
Yeah, mainly concrete. So that was the biggest surprise. I wish we found it in
this
time
little
for the
sliver
book.
over here.
Yeah, that little tiny sliver there is what we're obsessing over while steadfastly ignoring the rest of the pie chart.
Okay, do you want to go over any of these things before I flip out of this?
Yeah, so we hear from the environment. Everything's covered on this one page because people don't have time to read a book. So environmentalists tell us that 10 million tons of plastic are going in the ocean every year, which is wrong. It's 1,000 times too high. That was a guess, which has been disproven again and again. Then they tell us the amount in the ocean is going exponential, right? Because plastic use is increasing by 3% a year. But what they don't tell you is that metal, wood, glass, ceramics, paper, all of the materials are increasing by 3% a year. It's the exact same number. So that's no reason to demonize plastic when it's increasing at the exact same speed as everything else. And also, when you measure plastic in the ocean, there's been no increase for decades. Right. So they guessed that there would be an increase based on plastic production, but millions of measurements over 50 years show that it didn't increase. And then the next topic is waste. How much waste do you create? If you were to get rid of, let's say, plastic bags, there's a big vilification of plastic bags. A Kroger bag weighs 6 grams, right? The plastic bag, their paper bag weighs 60 grams. So you've opted to create 10 times more waste and use 10 times more material. And then when you check the environmental impact of those two bags, there's 30 studies in the world, and every one says that the plastic bag is dramatically better for the environment than paper or cotton or bioplastic. So why would you replace something when every single scientific peer-reviewed study says that it's the greenest solution? Why would you ban or replace that and increase harm? And that's what we're doing now.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just not only that is that one-to-one relationship there, but the plastic bag is just awesome. I mean, you can do so much more with it. I mean, first of all, a good fraction of the time, 15% of the time you're going to leave, it's raining. Depending, on results may vary by location. If you're in Arizona, perhaps not. But I was watching this crazy, one of these little TikTok kind of videos, reels, whatever they were. And I drive I have an electric bike. I've got a car. I've got feet. And oftentimes I use my little kind of push scooter, like a Razor scooter. People always say, "Where's the motor on that?" I'm like, "Me, I'm the motor." They're like, "Where's the bat? How do you charge that?" I said, "I eat food." Anyway, I pedal this thing around. If I go to New York, I put it on the train and I'll zip around on the bike lanes and so forth. It's awesome. It's a great thing to have around. I keep one in each of my cars. Blah blah blah. Anyway, that's me. But I was watching this video because this guy was leaving, say, Kroger's, and he's young. He's on an electric scooter, and he's got like 15 plastic bags around him, and including like a watermelon and this and that, and the woman's just like, okay, how is he going to carry that and be able to drive the scooter? But so he's got clips on it. He's got like a safety vest. He's got clips on. He's got those whatever those things called, carabiner. Yeah, and he's got a bunch of those. Boom, 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 boom. He puts all the plastic bags around him, so he looks a little bit like a Christmas tree with plastic bags. And he's got a baby, like a front baby carrier. Puts the watermelon in that. Okay, so that's his baby. And zip, he's off. He's like going 20, 25 miles an hour with this thing, and he's all weighted. He's circularly weighted. And there he goes. And the plastic bags carry everything. There's no way you'd be able to do that. I'm not saying people should do this, but there's no way you'd be able to do that with a paper bag. A plastic bag is so awesome, kind of universally. It's just an amazing creation. It's light. I think if people are old enough to remember that movie American Beauty, the young, he actually wound up in Yellowstone as the son of of the of Kevin Costner's kind of wayward son, but that character was an American Beauty, and he's a videographer, and he has this plastic bag just kind of formlessly flying through the air, and I guess changing forms and whatnot. But you can reuse them. We take them plastic bags, we reuse them. I trash pick as I walk around the neighborhood. I use a plastic bag, and it, clean up everything. Anyway, but people do have, I think, semi-valid worries, or they have not been assuaged as far as their worries go about the degradation and all the dolphins, with the six-pack containers around their beaks and whatnot. I mean, what's the deal? What should we worry about, and what should we not?
Yeah, let's cover all of that. Well, the great thing is once you take the time to understand the problem, it's the same as being a medical doctor like you are, right? Hopefully you don't just prescribe drugs before you've even checked out the patient, right? But as soon as you've checked the symptoms, then you realize what the problem is, right? And you got the solution. So that's the good thing about what came out of my work. The ironic thing with plastic bags is the guy who invented them, he's got the patent on them, lived in Sweden, and he made them to save trees. So they save about 5 million trees a year by using plastic bags. And the even more ironic part is that when you ban a plastic bag, you end up selling more plastic because, as you said, you end up reusing them as trash can liners, right, for your small trash cans, or like in the bathroom. Well, that's what most people do, and we do it here too. And when you can't use the plastic bags anymore from the grocery store, you go and buy trash can liners, which are like 5 times thicker than the bag you replaced. So the nets, people say to me, oh, of course you're against plastic bag bans. You're a plastic guy. You want to sell more plastic. I'm like, actually, if that was my goal, I'd be all for the bag bans because you end up selling more plastic that way. And then when people realize that, they end up reversing all these bans. So it makes me wonder, politicians do things to be popular. Makes me wonder why they're so dumb as to do something that's just going to turn around and make them look a fool a year later when they have to reverse their own policy. Because you can literally go to Google now, type in LCA, which stands for life cycle analysis, type in LCA bag, just like I did, right? Or life cycle bag. And you will get 28 studies, peer-reviewed studies all around the world. And everyone says the plastic bag is greenest. How come World Wildlife Fund has never done that? How come Greenpeace, who've got $400 million a year, apparently, according to Wikipedia, have never thought to type in LCA bag? That's 8 characters with return at the end, right? In 30 years.
Okay, so what would we be typing in?
LCA, which stands for life or life cycle bag. And you'll get hits the same as I did. If you're tenacious like I am, you'll end up with 28 hits, of actual studies.
And what do they show? What do they show? What is the degradation? I mean, we have plastic bags in the cupboard, and I have, we have laundry detergent sitting in plastic containers. I mean, those things don't ever seem to break down. You tell me what first of all, I just want to backtrack a little bit. I mean, we use the term plastic, but plastic actually does not mean what plastic is. Plastic means, morph, being able to morph, like Plastic Man.
Yes, it does.
Plasticity is the ability to change. Neoplasm in medicine is a new growth, something that's going to grow and change form and whatnot. So plastic's not really the right word. These are, as you mentioned, these are polymers. I was a chemistry major, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but it's not that different from I don't know which children's toys, like Lego or something like that. You start with small pieces and you build them out. Yeah. And
I was thinking paper clips. You hook one paper clip onto the next one. You start with monomers and you join them together until you have a long.
That's even better analogy. Fine. Or so chain link fence, any of those things. So that's really a plastic is a misnomer. It's a what would be the right term for plastic?
Well, I think it's a shortening of the word thermoplastic, which means, that it becomes plastic when you heat it up. So polymers like polyethylene and polypropylene and PET are thermoplastics because they melt and change shape, as you said, when you heat them up, and then they solidify when you cool them down. And then there are thermosets, which are like epoxy resins, which do not melt when you heat them up. So those are different. And then there's
okay. So under this one term, no pun intended, under this garbage bag term of plastic, we have lots of different compositions. I mean, you can change the chain link or the paper clip to one type or another. So what are the ones? Are there ones we should worry about? I mean, or not? I mean, certainly the functionality changes, and some things degrade within a year. I think you point out that some of the plastic bags degrade within a year in a landfill. But I've got plastic items in some of my vehicles, and they've lasted decades.
Yeah. Let me address that, because plastic degradation is one of the most confusing topics. This myth that plastics take hundreds of years to degrade, there's never been a single peer-reviewed, and I've read thousands of them, there's never been a single peer-reviewed study that says plastics will take thousands of or hundreds of years to degrade. That was made up by a woman called Martha Gorman in a book called Marine Pollution. It's on page 8, and she just states plastics can take hundreds of years to degrade in the ocean with no citation. You know how you put a little number there to cite to the science? There's no citation. She just pulled it out of thin air, and everybody just repeated it like silly little parrots, and nobody checked it. And one of my core competencies is polymer stabilization. I was taught that at Sussex University by Professor Norman Billingham, who's one of the gods of polymer degradation. And so plastics do degrade. There's whole teams of scientists trying to stop them from degrading so quickly. If you take a sheet of polypropylene, which is what Tupperware is made of, and leave it in a drawer in the dark, it will just crumble to pieces in a year, right? It loses all of its strength from attack of oxygen in a year if you don't put stabilizers in it. And the same with polyethylene. Polyethylene, if you take a polyethylene bag, and it's a very thin piece of plastic, like a leaf or a piece of paper, if you leave that outdoors, scientists have done that, just left it out in the open, and it degraded and fell to pieces and vanished in less than a year. It was 9 months. The thing just lost all strength, fell to pieces at the same speed.
I can attest to that. When, amongst my many strange behaviors or activities, is when I walk the dog, it used to irritate me that there was trash on the ground, and I had 2 dogs, so it was hard for me to pick it up and keep control of the dog. So I wound up having this waistband for my leashes. So I have my hands free, and I have one of those shelf grabbers, 3-foot long shelf grabber, and I have a bag, and the dogs do their dog stuff. Now I only have 1 dog, and I just pick up trash all the time. So everyone in the neighborhood knows that guy because I'm usually reasonably well dressed, not always a tie, but and I'm picking up trash. So I don't look like I'm off, I'm coming from the local, jail or, prison work crew. I kind of have a different, swagger to me. But I like cleaning up the area. So I pick up all kinds of trash. And, as a total side note, I think actually, people cast off their sins. You've probably heard that expression, you cast off your sins. Well, cast means to throw, like broadcast, you throw things out. People cast out their sins. I pick up trash. I've been doing this for decades now, and I see Suboxone wrappers. I see those little Juul smoke things these days. A lot of cigarette wrappers, whiskey bottles, those nips, lottery tickets. It seems that people have this sense of wanting to get rid of things, and they just toss those out the window.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing. Anyway, leaving that aside, I have noticed that plastic, if it's something I haven't found in a while, it might be sitting under dirt or whatever, I pick it up, it comes out in shreds, these little plastic bags. They don't come out intact as if they were on day one.
Yeah, the degradation rate is the same rate as it would be for a leaf or a piece of paper if you average it out. It depends if it's wet or dry and blah, 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 in the sun, not in the sun, buried, not buried. But if you average, from scientific studies, the degradation rate of a polyethylene bag is similar to a piece of paper or a leaf. So it's amazing that people have managed to perpetrate this myth that plastics don't degrade, especially when you think about it. You and I have both sat on these garden chairs, which have degraded and they've all chalked on the surface and they're all cracked. We've all had our car the headlights go yellow and hazy. We've all had I've got these gutter things outside, and one of those clear things you put over your basement windows. I've never had one last more than a year. So it is incredible to me that in our everyday life we literally watch plastics degrade in front of our very eyes, and yet when Greenpeace or the World Wildlife Fund claims that they don't degrade, we believe them. I mean, despite our very own experience telling us the opposite. What are you going to believe,
me or your lying eyes?
The stabilizer market for plastics is $5 billion a year. Do you think businesses would spend $5 billion on stabilizers if plastics were actually stable? Doesn't make sense.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I would push back slightly because we have, some detergent downstairs, and when those things, those very heavy duty plastic things, they seem to last, a good length of time.
Well, that's exactly right. So the great thing about plastics is you can choose how long you want it to last. If you've got a very thin piece of plastic, like a thing that you don't expect to have to be durable, right? You put a very, very small amount of stabilizers, like 100 parts per million. Stabilizer might even be vitamin E, which is a stabilizer for plastics, right? And it barely gets it through however long you think it should last. Then I worked at Electrolux Frigidaire at the R&D headquarters. And if you buy a washing machine, that's exposed to water. So you're washing out the stabilizer every time you use it. It's a very thick part. So it's thick, it has more stabilizer in it. and a lot more stabilizer, and it's a lot more durable. It's, it could last 20 years. There are pipes which are supposed to last 50 or 100 years in the ground because they put much more and much better stabilizers, and because the pipe is thicker, it takes more time for them to get washed out by the water. So you can basically tune in that degradation rate to be whatever you want. If you want it to degrade almost instantly, you can have that. If you want it to last 50 years,
so it's kind of a paradox. I mean, if it's made to be stable, like PVC pipes, made to be stable, you're not tossing those things. I don't pick up PVC pipes on my, because I don't want to like boast here, but I'll boast. I am an expert on trash in local parks, walkways, streets, and whatnot, in suburban neighborhoods, in the early 21st century, and I haven't cataloged them yet, but mentally, I do not pick up PVC pipes. I do not pick up really those Tide detergent heavy duty bottles. I don't pick up the ones that I have orange mango juice in. Now those seem to make it to recycle. For the most part, what people toss are the plastic bags, cigarette wrappers, that really fine plastic on cigarette wrappers. They toss the little nips, which are either glass or plastic. We can talk about that because actually you have three different components. The nips get tossed a lot, and so there's plastic. I might have plastic Smirnoffs with a metal top, or glass. Some of the little nips, they make them kind of high, kind of high profile. They're glass and metal, and so I think frankly the glass ones are worse because those are sharp. The dogs can step on them and whatnot. But let's talk about that. Like which is the best one environmentally if you're going to be tossing nip bottles?
Right. So the life cycle studies, that's the only way to know what's green and everything has impact, right? So the only way to have no impact is just go and dig a hole in the garden and put yourself in it, right? So assuming that we want to stay alive and we want to have our cell phones and our internet and the rest of it, we have to accept that we're going to create some impact. And the only way to create the least impact, which is what nice and responsible people want to do, is to check the life cycle analysis. And that adds up how much transportation and raw materials and pollution and CO2 and end of life and, collecting the litter, repairing the item. If it's a car, it includes driving your car around for its whole lifetime. What's the impact of that? And it sums all of that up, and it's peer reviewed. So you can't pull a fast one. People have to check it. And it's done according to well-recognized standards, and it's been optimized for 50 years, right? So it includes pretty much everything in the life of the product. And when you do that for a container, like you just asked, you find that the polyethylene container and the PET container are the greenest solutions, much, much greener than metal, including steel or aluminum or glass or paper. And that's what you find in every single study, right? The only thing that ever beats plastic that I've seen, having read 50 or 100 studies, is a piece of wood. If you can make something out of a piece of wood, it's greener than plastic. And that would include like a wine cork, for example. I'm not talking about a highly manufactured piece of wood that's been through a lot of process.
I'm just trying to think if I can get my detergent into a wood bottle.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's equivalent, right? If it was a similar way.
But clearly those have their own issues. I mean, we have a salad bowl that is made out of wood, and we have to take incredible care of it. We have to make sure it doesn't stay wet. We have to kind of keep it oiled and away from everything else. I mean, there's just a lot of things. I mean, so yes.
To your point, though, I think the real reason people don't like plastics is this litter thing that you've hit upon, right? And when you study litter, you find that more than 80% of it is dropped intentionally. And then these people have the temerity to turn around and blame the litter for not vanishing, right? That's why they're annoyed that plastics don't degrade. And that's why they're into these degradables. They want to be able to be a slob, drop stuff wherever they want, and turn around and have it vanish like they're on Harry Potter or something like that. And that is where this whole thing about degradation is coming from. And it's just farcical. I mean, 80% is dropped intentionally, and they know how to fix litter, right? They've done studies on that as well. The way to fix litter is education, fines, and deposit schemes.
I like the last one.
And the reason is as soon as a plastic piece has a value, nobody drops it because it's the same as dropping money.
Yeah. I know. I'm old enough to remember, the 60s and early 70s before the deposits came around, and the cans were different. They were more of the tab. You'd get rid of the tab and whatnot. And those were everywhere. And when the 5 cent, I don't know if they are still 5 or 10 cent, deposit came along. It's not a lot of money, but those things just disappeared. I don't see that many cans, deposit worthy items on my trash picking. And I've actually wrote a letter to somebody, to see if they could put 5 cents on the nip bottles. I don't know why, these
Yeah.
alcohol bottles don't have 5 cents on them. Totally other story. Let's try to stay a little bit on topic.
So that works. The litter, we know what the solution, we know what the problem is. It's people. Anyone blame? I saw a thing the other day. Plastic is the Coke is the #1 polluter in the world, and I'm like, that's just an outright lie. They should be sued, right? I mean, Coca-Cola doesn't make 1 billion bottles and pop them in the ocean, right? That's not how you make money. Some of their customers are careless, but to outright claim that Coca-Cola are the #1 polluter in the world, it's just untrue. And it should be, anyone should be able to see that. If I were in the street and my kid dropped a candy wrapper on the floor and they turned around and blamed the manufacturer of the candy wrapper, I would send them to their room with no dinner. It's insane. And
we need better. We sort of need better humans. We always want to go for gun control. We want to do this and that, as if the objects have their own lives and so forth. I mean, the guns, don't jump up and shoot people. I mean,
right.
Or else police wouldn't carry them. I mean, if guns did that stuff and were liable to just jump up and shoot somebody, they would not give them to police officers.
Yeah, that's exactly
But we obviously grade the person and say, oh, that guy, we're going to call him a police officer. We're going to give him a special uniform, and he knows, his gun is not going to do that. Anyway, so we have kind of anthropomorphized a lot of our items and we tag them, and that's almost religious-ish. Anyway, I want to get some fundamental questions. Can you elaborate on how plastics can actually help, in your view? We'll stipulate reduce CO2 emissions in various sectors, including vehicle manufacturing, food preservation.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I'd like to preface this by saying that I make it a point to try to never say anything positive about plastics, because it drives me nuts when plastics companies go around and say, well, they're negative, but look at the positives, because I find that that's such a weak argument. The argument for plastics is that it causes less harm than any of the alternatives, and it's cheaper as well. But having said that, you asked me a question, and basically that is the answer. They enable us to do things we can't do otherwise. Every single wire that comes to your home is wrapped in plastic as an insulator. And if it wasn't, you wouldn't have electricity in your home. You wouldn't have medical devices. You wouldn't have cell phones. You wouldn't have the internet. You wouldn't have computers. We wouldn't ever be able to put somebody in a rocket and send them to another planet so that humanity gets wiped out one day, which is what Elon Musk and Bezos are worried about. All of these things wouldn't be. And that's what I sometimes think when these real lunatics attack you and say, hey, down with plastics. I have no use for plastic, somebody said. And I said to them, go to the hospital next time and insist on being treated without plastics. And that would be the last decision you ever make, right? Because these people are demanding things which if they just stopped to think for 30 seconds, they wouldn't be demanding them, because they don't make any sense. We know why people are demanding these things, like obsessing over bags and straws, because they did a study in Europe in several different countries like France and Germany, and they found out, they looked at the things that would actually help the environment and the things that people obsess over. And the answer is that bags and straws make zero impact on the environment. The things that actually make an impact are flying, driving, and eating meat. But nobody wants to sacrifice any of those things, the things that would actually make a difference. So instead, they wander around waving their cotton bag in the air and pretending that they're a saint when they're a sinner.
Or they could do what you proposed earlier on, which is, dig a hole in the backyard and sit in it, and have somebody cover you over.
They should actually turn off their electricity, turn off their internet, throw away their cell phone, and sit there for a day or a week or however long it takes them to realize that they've made a decision that didn't really make any sense.
Yeah, no, I like this kind of game. At certain points, we've put in so many bike lanes and whatnot, but if you're going with 3 or 4 people, it's actually probably more efficient, especially with the weather. We're in New England, we get storms, ice, and whatnot. If you want to have long-term preservation of your health and your limbs and whatnot, and avoid being hit by a car. If there are 3 people, I think 3.5 people, it's hard to make a half person, but if you have 3.5 people going someplace, you are better off being in a car. It's more efficient than everyone on the bicycle, as far as logistically, leaving all that stuff aside. But I actually want to kind of touch on your book a little bit here, and I can show people what this is. And this is the plastics paradox, facts for a brighter future, and it's on Amazon. I'll show people later on as well. But I wanted to see if you could I really liked your preface blurb here. I don't know if I can make this bigger enough for people to see, but maybe you can touch on what this scene was here.
Yeah, so it was my wife's idea, actually. This was originally later on in the book, but she said, no, this has to be the thing that you open with. So I was sitting on an airplane next to some girl, and she had this thing down with plastics or whatever on her, a sticker on her laptop. And I thought, I wonder if this girl knows that this sticker is made of plastic. The adhesive that's sticking it onto the laptop, which is made of plastic. The laptop itself is made of plastic. And then she spent the whole flight like editing on her plastic computer some video that she'd made diving. And she'd made this video with a GoPro, which is made of plastic. And it's just amazing to me. Her clothes were made of plastic. They were made of nylon and polyester. I only spotted one piece of actual cotton, non-plastic, on her whole, in her whole area. And so it was just amazing to me that people claim they're virtue signaling. They're claiming that they're good people by saying they don't like plastic, but they haven't spent 30 seconds to think about what they're really saying. And that's a shame, because there's no way to make a brighter future if we don't start with things that are true and do have a little bit of reflection on what we should do.
Well, but as a counter argument, can I just give a reasonable counter argument?
Sure.
Shut up. That was it.
Yeah. And I've got to apologize. I didn't answer your question about CO2. So plastics manufacture creates 0.5% of all CO2 that we create. Right. So materials in general are about 25% of all CO2 we create, and plastics are 0.5%. And the funny part is that these green groups obsess about the CO2 from plastics production, right? And they give these big numbers. Oh, look how many coal power stations that is, or whatever. And what they never do is give any perspective, because everything has two sides of a coin, right? If you're insincere or basically biased or corrupt, you only show one side of a story. You show the cons and not the pros. Imagine I said to you, what's your net worth? And you said, well, I've got $1 million in savings, but I've got $5,000 of credit card debt. And I said, aha, this guy's in debt, right? And I totally ignore the fact that you're net in profit. And that's exactly what these green groups have done when it comes to plastic and the environment. So if you look at the CO2 needed to make plastics, 0.5%, but how much CO2 do we save by using the plastics? And the answer is more than 0.5%, because they make vehicles lighter, and that alone more than makes up for the 0.5% we spent to make the plastic. Just making vehicles lighter makes plastics net CO2 negative. And then we go on to food preservation, stopping the damage of food, stopping food spoilage. That's another huge factor, which is really tremendous, probably more than 0.5% as well. And then we have insulating homes, right? So you don't need as much coal and oil and so forth to burn to heat your home, because you've got better insulation. All of those things are huge net positives, and nobody talks about them. Because they're not really interested in the environment.
Well, I'm going to quote briefly the philosopher. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Homer Simpson.
Yeah, exactly.
So he has a famous line, which is beer is the cause of and solution to every problem.
I like it.
But in this case, I think we see it. We tend not to look at. We only look at the cause of the problem. We don't necessarily see that plastic is providing all kinds of solutions. You want a vehicle that is more, environmentally friendly. Get more mile per gallon. I grew up somewhere between the Jurassic and the Paleozoic, and we had huge, dinosaur cars. We had enormous Fred Flintstone cars, and they were all made of metal. And these days, I'm not sure what the exact weight is, but the fuel efficiency has gotten so much better, because we have fiberglass, which is not technically a plastic, but it's a plastic-like object.
It's a type of plastic, yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to move to carbon fiber and whatnot. These things, can have tensile strength. They can have lateral strength. There's all kinds of incredible things we do through plastics.
Right.
I'm not going to catalog all my items of clothing, but when you want to go hiking, you want something that's light, durable, waterproof potentially, and so forth. I mean, this is what you're not going to wear, like aluminum boots. It's just not going to work out for you.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
Sounds hilarious, especially when the lightning comes. And the thing is, that CO2 thing, it's the same when you look at fossil fuels. People are obsessed that plastics contain fossil fuel, right? They're made from it. But if you look at the total fossil fuel consumption to make aluminium or magnesium or glass, it's far more than it is to make plastic, because the amount of energy in fossil fuel to make plastic is down here. The amount you need to burn to melt glass, which is glowing red hot like lava, right? Or metals, which are glowing red hot when you process them. It's far far more fossil fuel to make those. And that's been measured. I mean, that's a scientific fact, and nobody talks about it. So I posted it on LinkedIn, and it went viral. It had 280,000 views when people finally saw a graph showing that although fossil fuels go into the plastic, the overall amount of fossil fuel is much lower than the other materials.
I'll have to go check that one out. So I maybe take a second, and I don't know if you want to talk about some of this. Is from your really nifty flip book, which I guess is covered on the web page as well.
Yeah, you've got an important graph there. So there's a misconception that plastics are creating a huge amount of waste and filling landfills, but it turns out that plastics, according to EPA numbers, are about 13% of what goes into a landfill. And if you look at how waste grows over time, it used to grow up linearly, as shown in your graph, until the 70s. And then suddenly it didn't go up anymore. The population went up, the amount of stuff that we were using was going up, but the amount of waste going to landfill actually leveled off and went flat. And scientists thought, oh, what's happened? What happened in this period in the 70s and 80s? And the answer is the adoption of plastics was very fast in that period. And what you find is, and you can verify this in your own kitchen, right? A plastic straw weighs 1 gram, a paper straw weighs 2 grams, a metal straw is 20 grams, a glass straw is 30 grams. And it's the same with other things as well. The plastic bag is 6 grams, the paper bag is 60 grams. So what happened over this period is that plastic use did increase exponentially because it was starting from a very low value. But 1 pound of plastic was replacing 3 or 4 pounds of metal or glass or paper on average. And that's why the amount of material going to landfill decreased and went flat over that period. And now you have another very important graph up. And people talk a lot about plastics recycling. And what they don't realize is that plastic is the greenest option in almost every case, according to life cycle analysis. And that is even the case with zero or low recycling. So people think we're waiting for recycling to come and make plastics green. And that's not true. Recycling does work. It is green, but plastics are already the greenest option, even without recycling. Recycling plastics is like the icing on the cake. Right. So it's already green, and it becomes even greener when you mechanically recycle it. And this mechanical recycling is very standard. It uses the same equipment as regular plastics processing, which is installed all around the world. It's proven to work, and it works just fine for 90% of plastics. This chemical recycling everyone talks about is only for the outliers.
So I'm going to come back to this in a second, but this is going back 20-something years ago, a little, maybe even into the 90s. There was going to be a plant in Massachusetts, and it got, a lot of government funding. I think it was under the Clinton administration. So that is quite a while ago. And I think Al Gore visited it. And basically it was a high temperature, like a plasma level temperature incinerator. Mm-hmm. And you throw anything in it, that's combustible, not metal, say. You could put all your plastics in it, and it would have them degrade and create energy. That would, feed the cycle. So it's an energy producer, like a biomass energy producer. And the end product was only carbon dioxide. And it was, none of the poisonous stuff. I think people worry when you burn a plastic that you're going to get noxious fumes and so forth. Is there any way, this is this recycling concept, but, is there a possibility of just using it as a secondary fuel, like a biomass fuel?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's covered in the book. The energy content of used plastic is the same as oil or coal, because plastic is oil, right? It's just oil where you've made the molecules longer. So the energy content per pound is the same as it is for oil or coal. And what they do in Sweden and some other countries is you take that used plastic, you burn it, and you use it to make electricity, right? So instead of oil now, you're using less oil because you're feeding used plastic instead of the oil or instead of the coal. So you're reducing fossil fuel usage, and you're getting energy out. And that's the mistake people make about degradables. My professor Norman Billingham pointed out degradable plastics is the worst possible solution, because now you're taking the solid, you're converting it to CO2, and you're not capturing the energy that's given out, right? And that's just a terrible idea. If you're going to degrade it and convert it to CO2, at least capture the energy and make something useful like electricity out of it. So people have got that all backwards as well.
Right. So, but as far as the secondary, if you don't burn it well enough, you're going to get that, like little benzenes and whatnot kind of falling out of it. No?
Which is the same thing you get when you burn paper, right? Or wool or wood, you get the same kind of thing. So I've looked at the pyrolysis products of wood. There's an astonishing amount of benzene comes out of wood. I was just looking into separate topic. But anyway, I was looking into what's created during a forest fire because people were making some outlandish claims about there's this benzene everywhere. Where's it coming from? I'm like, a tree converts to, from memory now, something
Well, I mean,
like 1% benzene.
I mean, turpentine comes from a pine tree, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they make these things, and you know, fossil fuels and whatnot. I mean, they're fossils of trees.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right. That's right. So you do create toxic products when you burn things. It depends on the temperature, but there are scrubbers that you use to pull that out of the smokestack before it goes, you know, so it doesn't get into the air. And that's been done.
And theoretically, again, if you burnt it at a high enough temperature, you would not get that.
Yes. One thing that does drive me nuts is everyone talks about taking plastic, which is fuel, and converting it into fuel, right? I'm like, why would you take it would be like taking $100 and converting it into $80 worth of yen, right? You're just throwing away money. And in this case, you're throwing away energy. You're taking something which was perfectly good fuel, as good as oil or coal, and then burning half of that energy to convert it into liquid fuel. It's totally nonsensical. I can't understand how people are getting hundreds of millions.
Well, I think there's a secret word you're missing, which is called subsidies.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get back on track here. Well, we can go, I guess, back to your flip book, and maybe just hit the next page. This is like, first of all, I'm going to have a moment of silence here for the number of birds. This is mortality in birds per year. So people worry about the big plastic island out there. Is there a big plastic island?
No. Even the guy who discovered the patches, reporters ask him every day. There's literally a PhD thesis on this. People go to that guy and say, please sail me out to this patch so I can take a picture. You know, the reporters are asking him. He said, there's nothing to see there. Even if you go out to the middle of a gyre, you can swim through it without knowing you're in one. You can sail through it without knowing you're in one. It's virtually undetectable. It's just a place with slightly more plastic than the rest of the ocean that has practically no plastic.
And where are these theoretically?
There's some in the Pacific. And the interesting thing about today, that's the biggest one, Pacific garbage patch. But the interesting thing about that is today you can see everything by satellite, right? You can go on a satellite on your computer now and scan anywhere in the world. And you can see a cigarette packet on a good resolution satellite image. Those are the best military ones. Wow. And yet you can scan all day long and you'll never find any hint of these garbage patches because there is no floating island. The myth of that came up when it was translated from a German report, I think it was translated into Russian by Pravda, which ironically means truth. And when they translated it from another language, they changed the word from plastic carpet to mountain. And that's how this idea of a plastic garbage patch came about. And that's covered in this PhD thesis. I can send it to you if you want.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Well, alternatively, I might spend the rest of my week just looking at the ocean from Google. Yeah. From Google.
And the weird thing is, you know, when you so this idea that 10 million tons went into the ocean, that was a guess by somebody called Jenna Jambeck. So she had no data and she just made up a number. She guessed that 2% of plastic within 35 miles of the ocean would leap into the ocean by itself. 2% of any plastic anywhere in the world that was mismanaged would by itself crawl into the ocean, right? On the back of an envelope. And so she came up with 8 or 10 million tons a year based on a guess, right? And now we have 50 years of data that proves that that's completely wrong. I mean, study after study after study showing 1,000 times less and no increase over time. Yeah. So this amazing emergency, and you would think, right? So I've published this online, right? When people publish this, like Ellen MacArthur Foundation claim there'll be more plastic than fish by 2050. It's been debunked by the BBC, by the CBC, by me. It doesn't matter how many times you debunk it, they still leave this information up there, which is wrong, right next to a big juicy donate now button, right? And that's the interesting thing. These so-called environmental groups clearly are not interested in the environment because when you show them the facts, they never update their websites. They never admit that they were wrong. They're just about, here's a bunch of nonsense we made up and please donate. And you could even check that with the former president of Greenpeace, Dr. Patrick Moore. He left and said their whole business concept now is just to tell you lies to get your donations, and the rest are doing the same.
That's something that has happened in medicine as well. The Susan B. Komen Foundation for Breast Cancer, and I don't want to go too far into this as people misinterpret, but at one point they were doing 1 in 5 women get breast cancer. And so I kind of looked into that further. And they were using extrapolated data if every woman lived to 120 and never got any other illness. Like somehow they decided that was the normal life expectancy of humans, when that's never been shown anywhere else.
Yeah.
And then obviously at some point you're going to die from something, and you're going to get cancer if you didn't get anything else. So, but that was a thing to, bring fear, and fear. I don't know if you noticed during the last pandemic, but fear is a motivator.
Yeah.
One way or another, to get people to do what you want them to do.
That's right. There's a lot of that going on now, and nobody's checking anything. The media used to check things, but they don't do it anymore. Here's the book
I think they do it on cycles. I think, this is my own conspiracy.
Here's the book by Dr. Patrick Moore, where he says what I just claimed, because I always like to show my sources.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, no, I actually quoted him with Matthew Willisky just yesterday. Anyway, so let's see if I can come up with another. I got some questions written.
We have to touch upon microplastics because everyone's obsessed by those.
Okay.
So,
well, why don't you have a self question? Want to pop
sure.
one in?
So should we be worried about microplastics? And the answer is, well, first of all, dust is dangerous. I'm sure as a doctor, you know that if you look at small
so would you
particles,
define what we're talking about? What kind of animal are we talking about with microplastics?
So we're talking about plastic dust, right? So what the environmentalists done, dust is dangerous. People are dying of dust all around the world. Hundreds of millions of at least, I think hundreds of millions, at least millions and millions of deaths are attributable to air pollution and dust. And so it is something that theoretically we should be concerned about. And at the moment, people are obsessing about plastic dust, right? The environmentalists have done something very clever. They don't call it dust, they call it microplastic, right? So what else is in dust? We got dead skin cells, we got spores, from creatures. We got quartz, which is proven to cause cancer in humans in large amounts, huge amounts of quartz, which are proven to be dangerous and to cause cancer in dust. We've got coming from rocks all around us. We've got wood dust, which causes cancer. We got leather dust, which causes cancer. IARC proven to cause cancer. Nobody cares about any of these kinds of dust because they haven't been branded by the environmental groups to sound scary. If you said it was plastic dust, right, nobody would be scared because it's just part of dust. And I see these articles like, oh, we found microplastics on Everest. And you're like, really? You found dust on Everest? What an incredible headline. Like, dust is everywhere, right? So the question is, how much of the dust that we're breathing, and we have been breathing for millennia, how much of it is plastic, right? And the answer is dust. Peer-reviewed study, dust is 0.001% of all the particles we're ingesting, right? So, and the rest of it contains, as I said, heavy metals, things that cause cancer, toxins, all of that. Nobody cares about it. They're obsessed by 0.001%. And it's polyethylene and polypropylene, which are plastics that have been tested and found to be so safe, they're like FDA approved for food contact, right?
Right. I mean, on the one hand, the whole purpose of these, plastics is that they're stable. You know, I mean, in order to, so I have a book, I haven't put it out yet, but I wrote a book last summer on cancer. And I mean, I know there are loads and loads of books on cancer. No, who wants to read my book? But it debunks a lot of myths, such as the one I was mentioning about the Susan Komen Foundation, the numbers there. But, the essence of cancer is that you need an irritant. You need something that's going to irritate you, so people think asbestos causes cancer. It actually causes mesothelioma, which is more.
I know. I've researched this as well.
Which is more like a tuberculosis granuloma. It's not an actual cancer, but okay, fine. But what it is it's an irritant that breaks up macrophages would try to eat it. So macrophages try to eat the asbestos. It kills the macrophage, and then there's more dead macrophages around, which macrophages try to clean up. Then they all impale themselves on this spike of asbestos and so forth. But it's kind of to your point a little bit. Again, this would be a huge rabbit hole to jump down into, but since it was 9/11 just a couple of days ago, there are two different kinds of asbestos remnants. There's long asbestos, which it's kind of like a wool cotton fiber that they used for insulation. That is not the one that was causing mesothelioma in the cases. What they had was the grinders who made it on the ships and whatnot. World War II, they had a lot of asbestos. They were cutting it down. The people who actually did the cutting, they were getting these fine particulate asbestos, and those get inhaled, and they have to pass through the whole respiratory pathway of the really tiny bronchioles and whatnot, who have their own cilia kind of hair network to keep these things out. And so you need a particle small to get in. So the irony is that the World Trade Center towers had been covered in fibrous asbestos, all the steel, structural steel, when it was built. And somewhere like 7-8 years into it, this concept that asbestos should be taken out of everything came along, and they pulled all the asbestos out of the building at huge expense. And what they did with it, I don't know. But lo and behold, had it been there, I'm not saying the buildings wouldn't have fallen, but when they were hit, they probably would have lasted a couple of hours longer. And that would have been a huge difference in the death toll. Anyway, so people adopt things. They hear something and they adopt it universally, when in fact there are always subcategories of how these things are qualified and classified. And as far as the cancer risk, I'm just guessing that some of the metal fragments would have less higher rate of being particularly irritant than some of the plastic ones, which, as we know, are pretty inert.
Yes.
They're not necessarily irritant. We have plastic all next to our skin all the time. We drink stuff from it. Frankly, the juice that I was drinking a second ago was in a plastic bottle for, I don't know, the last few months till I purchased it, whatever.
Yeah. If you grind asbestos down really fine, it's not carcinogenic. And if you have the medium-sized fibers, it is. And if they're very long, it's not carcinogenic again. And conversely, so it's not chemically carcinogenic.
Right.
And
So it's not, I mean, people think carcinogenic is something that's going to bring cancer, but basically, carcinogenesis is kind of like picking at a scab over and over and over again.
Right.
So if you have an irritant that never stops, then you will get cancer. It's not that sunlight per se brings skin cancer.
Exactly.
It's the fact that you get these wounds, and the wound doesn't really heal because there's more sunlight. So anyway, leaving that aside. So let's see if we can. We're kind of rounding out the hour here.
So there are studies on microplastics, and there was a very interesting review. And what it did was it looked at all the scientific studies and said that of the scientific studies, only a tiny, a minority says that there's a danger. But if you look at the media reports, 93% of the media reports say that there's a definite danger from microplastics. And this is where the problem's coming from. The media is just totally misrepresenting the science. And then you could say, well, okay, let's say 20% of scientific studies say that there's a problem. Shouldn't we be worried about those? And I read those studies, and you find out that none of them are valid. And what I mean by that is that they use 1 million times too much plastic, right? And a dose is important, right? If you take table salt is dangerous. If you have 5 teaspoons of table salt, you die, right? If you take too much aspirin, if you take too much ibuprofen, if you oxygen is 20% in the air, if you take 100% oxygen, which is only 5 times more, you die, right? Water, if you're surrounded by water, you die.
Well,
right?
you can drink too much water, you can drink too little, you can die. Either one.
Anything is toxic. So what they do is they take these microplastics, they take a kind which doesn't exist anywhere in the environment. It's a cross-linked polystyrene particle that you buy in a biology lab, right? You can't get it anywhere in the real world outside of a lab. They take that, which is completely the wrong kind of plastic, and they use 1 million or 10 million times too much of it. And then they say, hey, we're getting a response. And the other thing they never do is they never do a proper control, right? They compare it to clean water, and that's not a proper control. You should compare these particles at a proper dose to some other kind of particles, right, that are common. They never do that. So I searched and searched for a study, and there's more than one study where they did a control. They compared, okay, we got some polyethylene, which is the right kind of plastic, and we're going to compare it to something natural like clay or cellulose, which is what plants are made of, right? And they find out that it's exact same safety if you take polyethylene particles and compare it to clay or cellulose, which are perfectly safe, that it's the exactly same response, right? Just as safe as those. But that's not what these people are doing. They're so desperate for funding and to get attention that they're just making stuff up and scaring people, as you said. And I can't stand that. It's not about defending plastics. It's about defending the truth. And unfortunately, not many people.
You should be defending plastics as well, because we hugely benefit from them. I mean, it's so much easier to move around and have things light. People take a water bottle to the beach. They don't think about it, but that kind of like bubbled plastic is just an amazing concept. I've often joked with my wife that if I were to go somehow make a time machine, go back to 1,000 years ago, I'd want to bring that the bottle that has my mango orange juice. I would be seen as a god, to have this bottle that will preserve my food. I could put soup in that, whatever, and close it up and have it be good still, days later. How tough what must it have been when people had wood or animal skin canteens and whatnot, and it was a tough life. And it's a funny thing, if we worry and fret about cancer. We're living longer than ever before.
I know.
I think we're kind of maxing out, because I think there is a max to what human body can put up with and whatnot. But we're living longer than we did 100 years ago, clearly. And complaining about it more and more.
If you look at the data, there's a book by Steven Pinker, I don't know if you read it, called Enlightenment Now, and he literally quantifies we're living longer than ever. The IQ is higher than it's ever been. There's less death, there's less disease, there's less natural disasters. by there's less war, almost any metric you can pick, we're better off than we ever were. And still we're complaining and finding things to be scared about. My wife calls it luxury problems. It's like the housewives of Orange County. You give everyone $100 million and they still find a reason to squabble and bicker and find something to be negative about.
Yeah. So I a couple of years ago, I had lunch with Steven Pinker. But let me qualify that. He was at the table over there. He was like one table away from me, and I recognized him, but I didn't say hi or anything like that because we were at a dim sum Chinese restaurant, kind of a place where they cart around the food. But I saw him right there. It's all I could do not to go over and say hello. So we didn't quite have lunch together. We had lunch near each other.
You know why people don't want to hear this good news? Because if you lose $10, you feel bad, right? So, and I would have to give you $20 to compensate for how bad you felt from losing 10. And that's why all we hear about is negative news. It's so much more powerful. And plus, think about this. There's a thing called Brandolini's law, and it says that there's a 10 or 100 times more difficult to debunk the rubbish than it is to make up the rubbish in the first place.
You got to send me that one.
Yeah, it's also called the... Yeah, what is it? There's another less polite name for it, but it's but anyway, Brandolini's law, and he's a computer software person, and he said making up stuff is easy, but going and finding the evidence and debunking it is a lot of work, and that's the problem with my work. I've spent thousands of hours unpaid because I actually care about truth. Meanwhile, the green groups are just making stuff up faster than I can debunk it.
Well, maybe we can get you in touch with Patrick Moore.
I am in touch with him. Yeah, he said my work is the best work he's ever seen on plastics and the environment.
Well, there you go. Well, I'll have him see if we can get him on my show. Okay. You've criticized environmental groups for perpetuating misinformation. How can these groups realign their missions to truly help the environment? And what role can plastics play in this?
They never will. I mean, it's all about money. They don't care about the environment.
That was an easy question.
They abandoned the environment long ago. It was taken over by completely new people who were just out for the money.
All right. You discussed the potential. This is another podcast you were on. You discussed the potential of hydrogen as an alternate energy source. Can you delve deeper into how the plastic industry could potentially integrate with a hydrogen-based energy system? I think we already know the answer to that.
I don't believe in the hydrogen thing for most things. If you listen to the opinions of Paul Martin online, who designs chemical plants for a living, he's literally completely debunked the hydrogen thing. There is no green hydrogen, for one thing. Yeah. Right? It takes an insane amount of energy to make it. It makes no sense to transport it anywhere. Its energy density is just too low to ever work on airplanes. It will never work on cars. It might work on trucks, and it will never be a heat source for anything. It's just a bunch of nonsense that people have made up to get funding and subsidies, as you talked about. The same with direct carbon capture. That doesn't work either. These giant vacuum cleaners to suck CO2 out of the air. That's just a big scam as well.
I know, craziness. I was at, unfortunately, speaking of people getting older, I was at the funeral of my nonagenarian aunt. She was 93, and God bless her. But one of my relatives is a physics PhD by history, and he was talking about hydrogen and this kind of great myth about it. And he says, basically, it's not atomic, it's molecular H2 hydrogen. But they like each other so much that they get so tight, even tighter than in size than the actual hydrogen original atom, singular. And they're so small that you can't keep them in anything.
Yeah, they go through metal.
Any piece they can zip through the metal, and they can, wherever you have the valves and closures, wherever you're going to let the stuff out, ultimately they're going to slink through there, because that's life. So you can't keep it as well as you can a propane tank and so forth. You just, it's kind of an impossibility as far as long-term storage goes.
Yeah. And back to things that make no sense. So I see these things, like the direct carbon capture. They've got these ships going around with nets, right, collecting plastic. And I saw a headline the other day. Oh, we collected 100 tons of plastic, and they pop it on the thing and they say, like, tremendous, what great people we are, right? But then you have to, and this has been proven that this doesn't work, right? Because the amount of plastic in the ocean, the concentration is so low. And then you've got this giant ship burning diesel with black smoke going out the chimney, going up and down. They calculated, the NOAA, so the government branch, I think it is, calculated it would take 67 ships going 24/7 for a year to clean 1% of one patch, right? So it makes no sense. So I said to these people who found 100 tons of plastic, in a week or whatever, I said, and how many hundreds of tons of diesel did you burn? And how much CO2 went up the chimney? And how much black smoke? I mean, the net effect of this is to increase harm. And there they are pretending to be wonderful people and collecting hundreds of millions in subsidies to do stuff that is...
Yeah, no, I agree. It's oftentimes, there's an old terrible joke, and I apologize for giving this one because my father's a lawyer, my brother's a lawyer, my brother-in-law is a lawyer. But there's a joke, how do you keep a lawyer from drowning?
I don't know.
you take your foot off his neck. So the idea is that you're the one causing his drowning, and you can stop him from drowning if you stop drowning him.
Yeah.
But a lot of these things, a lot of the things that politicians seem to do, they're making problems of their own devising and then try to fix them as well.
Right.
So I think the people oftentimes left alone will come to a reasonable equilibrium on this kind of thing. But there's so much scolding going on that again, getting back to my garbage route, people cast off the things they have that they kind of are embarrassed about. They get rid of their nip bottles, they get rid of their cigarettes, and they throw these things out. And people have this kind of collective guilt about prosperity, and they're throwing that out. When that's a weird thing, because I get throwing away the cigarettes, fine. You're embarrassed about the cigarettes, you're embarrassed about your alcohol problem. I get it, but it seems as if there's kind of more from the left, kind of the Greta, we'll call it, kind of Greta Thunberg-ism aspect of getting rid of society. There's an anger towards society, mostly I think from people, who are not necessarily succeeding on their own in that society.
Oh, I see. Yeah. There is a good point to be made there, because if you look at, how they're always trying to make us feel guilty about, putting things in the ocean and this and that. And it's all about guilt, right? And empty your pockets, donate now. And if you look at who's creating this waste, for example, there's a map of it. You can go to ourworldindata.com. It's in the book too, and see who's creating the waste. And it is the wealthy nations, right? The more stuff you've got, the more money you've got, the more waste you create. But then you look at who is mismanaging the waste, and it's not America, it's not Europe, it's not the developed nations. It's a few rivers in Africa and so forth that are spewing all this stuff in.
Well, that's the thing. Prosperity is the antidote to pollution, to disease, to litter, to all that stuff.
And we have waste collection, we have the taxes, we have the prosperity, we have the mechanisms and the technology to take care of it. And the weird thing is, and then you would ask, well, why are the environmental groups trying to make us feel guilty when it's not us creating the problem? When you look at the data, right? And the answer is, we got deep pockets. They can't go to some dude in a hut in Africa and say, hey, empty your pockets.
It's the street, what is it? Lost car keys under the street light problem.
Yeah.
I mean, they look where they are because that's where the light is, and that's where they can look. They don't look at China where they can't look, or they're not allowed to look, or they're not allowed to point fingers. It's often, this happens over and over again. My kids, when they were in high school, whatever it is, almost 20 years ago, well, I guess starting maybe 15 years ago, we'll call it. They were pointing their finger at, women being treated badly in societies. I'm like, oh, are you going to do Afghanistan? Nope.
Right.
Nothing.
Right.
They
I know,
were doing,
it's amazing.
they were doing.
I've researched that as well. I've looked into some of these studies on gender pay gap and everything. And it seems to me, the more passionate you are, the less you care about the facts. So these people are gung-ho. They're ready to take action. They're demanding, like I was talking about this Irvine, Kathleen Tressiter in Irvine, California. She's a council member. She's got no expertise whatsoever in plastic. She's a global warming person. And she just demands all these changes. We're going to ban this. We're going to get rid of that. And where's the evidence? None was presented. And so I wrote a report unpaid where I presented all the peer-reviewed science saying categorically, this is 100% going to increase harm. There's no doubt about it. Every study says so. And this person is demanding stuff that makes no sense. So passion is a good thing, but it has to be directed. Speaking
of the trash trail, you should hire somebody to, go to her house and sift through her trash as she puts it out.
That's a great point. Yeah.
There, but for, go at any rate. So let's see. What would you like? I've got a few other questions here. Well, I don't know. They're kind of stock questions. I think we've kind of gone over a lot of them already. What do you see as the end result? Where would you see us in 10 years? More plastic, less plastic? What's going to happen? How do you get people to change their views? What's your ideal situation? What are you hoping for?
I guess my ideal situation would be, before you can make a policy decision, you have to have evidence, right? Because there's a proposal. I wrote a whole webpage because there's a dude in the Canadian government who just keeps proposing things which are complete nonsense. He's trying to ban one of the safest flame retardants in the world, right? So he's literally condemning hundreds of Canadians to die in their bed in flames, right? And based on what evidence? No evidence whatsoever, right? They've got some computer program that says blah, blah, blah. And literally the instructions of the computer program says this can't be used to predict safety of the chemical, right? And there's even data showing that it is safe. I mean, there's 200 countries in the world, right, more or less, right? Every single one of them, it's approved as one of the safest things you can think of. Some guy in Canada decides that he wants to ban it for no reason, and they do it on the pretext of being on the safe side. I'm like, there's nothing about being on the safe side of condemning hundreds of people to die in their sleep burning. And often it's young and old people who are not as mobile who get caught in these fires, right? On the one side versus zero evidence on the other side. What's safe about that? And that's not the only one. The same guy's trying to do things with plastics and so forth. And I think it should be that these people have to check the facts before they make decisions, and B, have some accountability if they make bad decisions based on nonsense.
So how can people follow you and or help support your ideas, and where are they coalescing?
Yeah, well, for me, it's very important to do everything unpaid to keep it impartial, and so that's all my work done unpaid. The book's unpaid, but I think the main thing you can do is if you know any politician, if you know any reporter, go to the website and show them the facts. Even big companies like Amazon just said they're going to get rid of these plastic mailers, the ones with the blue and the white. There's like 4 studies on mailers, and every single one shows that is the greenest solution, and going to paper is massively worse, like 3 times more fossil fuel and 3 times more waste and 3 times more CO2. It's just a terrible idea. And the studies have been done. It's not like the evidence isn't there. You could literally type life cycle mailer into Google and find these studies. How can Amazon and Apple and big companies like that not spend 30 seconds to check the facts?
So how do you support yourself then?
Oh, this isn't my job. This is my hobby because I care about truth. My job is being a plastic scientist and solving problems for people. This whole environmental thing was just because my daughters were lied to at school.
Speaking of which, I can't let you go without talking about plastic straws. And maybe you could just, I think it's here right in the intro.
The plastic straw is the perfect example because a 9-year-old boy called Milo Kress came up with this number. Americans use 500 million straws a year, and he had no evidence for it whatsoever, right? No, nothing. And so the New York Times covered it, the Washington Post covered it, and USA Today covered it. There's this huge crusade against plastic straws based on something that was just fiction. Oops. And what happened, right? People got rid of the plastic straw. They went to paper. And what's happened now? People have done the life cycle analyses. They found out that the greenest solution is just say no to a straw. I mean, anyone with an IQ above 60 could have worked out, just don't take a straw, right? That's the greenest solution. But if you have to take a straw, the plastic one turns out to be the greenest one. And the more times you reuse it, you can reuse it 50 or 100 times, the greener it gets, right? And now what they found, it was just in the news this week, the paper straws and the bamboo straws are leaching all these forever chemicals, right? Because paper and bamboo aren't waterproof like plastic is. So they have to put in these nasty chemicals to make them waterproof. So the paper straw, which barely lasts one use and is much worse for the environment and creates much more waste, more CO2, more fossil fuel. And now we found out it's less safe as well. And all because people didn't spend 10 seconds to go and check the facts before they made a ban. And the other thing is, and this is a key point, usually the cheapest solution is the greenest one. Because if you think about it, many of the things that go into what makes something expensive are the transportation, how much energy was used to make it, how much pollution did you have to clean up, and all of these things. Many of the same things that go into a life cycle study. So we've got a recession coming now, and people are wondering, how can I afford to be green? And the fantastic news is, just buy the cheapest option, and that's usually the greenest one too. Who wants to spend more money on a cotton bag or a paper straw and increase harm, and meanwhile empty your pockets? It just doesn't make sense.
No, it's a funny point there. I was behind the Iron Curtain when it existed in the late 1980s, 87, I think. And you want pollution? All the socialist paradises, east of the Iron Curtain, and we were in Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, and Yugoslavia.
Yeah,
those were the most horribly polluted places because they didn't have the money to have their basic needs met. So they don't have the luxury of starting to care about these secondary things, these kind of first world problems, as it were. Yeah. And so I think the smelliest, most horrible city at that time was in Romania, and it was just like a film. People walking through industrial waste. Rebreathing, and the life expectancy was like in the 50s and whatnot, 50 years old, and Soviet Union as well, like things you don't even see in Africa today.
And
So
London and New York used to be like that. That's where those brownstone buildings came from. The horse manure was so high that you had to build your house up on stairs so that you didn't, you weren't stifled by the stench. So we've had these problems before. We got prosperous. We got out of it through technology, and we know what the solutions are. It's not like it's a mystery.
no, I know, but it's fun. It's hilarious. We're kind of certain places. I think ultimately it will play out because there is competition of ideas to a certain extent. But you make an excellent point there. This was a study. I mean, a fact that everyone knew. I don't think you hear it as much, but the average American uses, say whatever the number is, 20 times more fuel than somebody in the third world per person. It's like to make food, I guess they were talking about. So they had a farmer in Pakistan uses like no oil, and the farmer in Iowa uses a lot. But what they missed was the guy in Iowa is producing, like, his yield is like 20 or 30 times higher per acre than it was in Pakistan. And it's not like the Pakistan guy wasn't using fuel. He was using feed. He had donkeys, and he's feeding them food, and the donkey doesn't have an off switch, like the John Deere does. So your tractor, you can turn off. You only use fuel when you're using it. And the donkey has to eat and breathe 24/7.
Right.
And he might be sick, a third of the time as well, and break his foot, so forth. So the efficiency was totally left out of this equation. And so if they want to look at gasoline, yes, the Pakistanis were not using gasoline, but they weren't any better off. And you look at net fuel they used per ounce of food, the Iowa farmer was, like 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more efficient.
That's the problem. People are not genuinely showing the true problems. They're just distorting things to make their narrative instead of really trying to make things better. And that's a shame. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to end with my shameless self-promotion. I apologize. But I have a book out which debunks. It's called Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. As time goes on, we might forget about Zika microcephaly, but it was a big deal in 2015-16. There was the Rio, Brazil Olympics. People went nuts over with fear about that. There were babies, they would have babies with small heads. Zika is a real virus. It's a dengue-like virus. And microcephaly is a real but very, very, very rare problem in birth. But it just so happens that one doesn't cause the other. But nobody has retracted, retrenched, reformulated, anything. They still maintain there's $1 billion industry going into Zika. There's going to be a Zika vaccine probably within a year. No doubt it's going to be mandated by the WHO, and there's no point to it. So I'm not an ID guy, but I came upon this, and I was just impressed nobody else was discussing it. And a little bit like your plastics journey, I felt I had to do this, and I had a lot of resistance. I talk about it here, I think at the bottom. Well, maybe not. I can't find it right this second. Anyway, this is a book that if you want to help the podcast, you can buy it. Even better would be if you read it, and there you have it.
Terrific.
So,
I just like to conclude with what you said. I mean, people have got different opinions, but believe the person who's got the most evidence, right? If one side's claiming that plastics don't degrade and there's zero evidence of that, and another guy's got 100 or 1,000 peer-reviewed articles, if somebody says that, that says that they do degrade, then you should know who to believe. It's not about believing me, right? I literally show with links to the evidence. Go and check it yourself. Click the link. So it's not difficult to decide who to believe. If there's 30 studies and they all say plastic bags are greenest, then they're not funded by they're from like Clemson, and independent universities and peer-reviewed and checked, not from the plastics industry. And if the evidence is overwhelming, the same way the court system works, go with the side that has good evidence. And
that's a great point you're making. As I've been talking about Zika microcephaly and certain other issues, I say this is now a year old, but I say people know so much more about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard than they do about fill in the blank.
I stepped on
about the bivalent vaccine or the efficacy or whether Zika might cause microcephaly, any of these things, because there was actually a trial, and I'm not going to say that you're going to get people riveted on a trial on plastics. Chris DeArmitt versus I don't know, you name it. Some environmental, whoever puts the nails in trees or whatever, but it would be nice if there were actually a courtroom proceeding and we could have a judgment, so forth. People might have this a little bit better. Science, they say they have peer review, but so much of it is internal and has, the fixes in for a lot of things, and almost ditto maybe with the court system too. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I'm waiting for is for the the donors to sue the green groups, right? I'm not interested in it, but the donors should sue them and say, hey, you lied to me to get my money and I want my money back. And there should be a class
That's not
action
bad.
lawsuit. And I'm waiting for
That's
that to
not bad.
happen. A lawyer even
Yeah.
told me that it's a very strong case if somebody were to do that.
That's interesting because, you know, this guy, I forget which of the Bass family it was. I think they're Texas and oil and whatnot, but one of them went to Yale along the way, and he's probably in his 80s now. And he made a donation, you know, $100 million, something like that, to Yale. And he wanted to have a curriculum in, you know, we'll call it the classics, you know, just like straight up American history, straight up English and so forth, without blank studies, you know, without, no courses on Homer Simpson, that kind of stuff. So just kind of the classic directed curriculum. And they said, oh yeah, of course, Mr. Bass, you know, 200, whatever the number is, $200 million. Thank you so much. And then 5-10 years later, you know, they had poured all the money into gender studies and this and that. And he's like, dude, I want my money back. They're like, you gave it to us. Like, yeah, but read this. And he sued them for it, and he got it all back.
Good. Good.
So that does happen. It is a thing. So
if you're passionate about something, make sure you're on the right side before you start exercising your passion. It's like a missile, right? And missiles are powerful, but point them in the right direction, or else you end up shooting yourself in the foot. And mixed metaphor there. But anyway, that's it's a very important thing to precede the passion with some fact checking.
Yeah, that's so old fashioned. Anyway, we're going to use the technology, such as it is, to get this out soon enough. Thank you so much for being with me, Chris.
Thank you, Randall. That was really a blast. Thanks.